Personality is the combination between thinking, feeling, and acting. There's two main approaches to personality, the first one being the psychoanalytic approach. This approach was created by Sigmund Freud, who described personality as being divided into three sections: the id, superego, and the ego. The id represented unconscious desires that would feel good right now, such as sex or drugs. The superego is our moral compass that decides what's right from what's wrong. And finally, the ego. The ego negotiates between the id and superego to find a happy compromise that both are okay with. Freud used an iceberg to illustrate the mind. The conscious part of our mind is above the waterline. The waterline itself was the preconscious, where memories kind of floated above and below. Most of the iceberg is below the waterline, the unconscious. Freud believed this is where memories that were too painful to remember went. He used a variety of techniques to unlock the unconscious, such as hypnosis and free association. This is where he would say a word and his patient would say whatever immediately popped into their head. Freud also used dream analysis. This is where he would analyze manifest content and latent content of dreams. Manifest content is what the dream actually was and what is remembered, the censored version. Latent content is what Freud interpreted the dream to actually mean. Freud also believed we went through 5 stages of psychosexual development. The first of these was the oral stage, where the pleasure center was on the mouth. This lasted from 0 to 18 months. The second of these stages was the anal stage, that lasted from 18 months to 3 years. Next is the phallic stage, that lasts from 3 years old to 6 years old. In this stage, Freud thought the Oedipus complex occurred, where boys wanted to have sex with their mother and kill their father. In this stage, he thought the boys saw the dad as a competitor, but knowing they could not compete with dad, their sexuality goes dormant. Next is the latency stage. This stage lasts from 6 years old to puberty, in which sexual desires go dormant. And lastly, the genital stage, that lasts from puberty on. Freud thought this is where sexuality returns, and that the desires from the earlier days are now in the unconscious.
Repression. This is pushing desires that cause anxiety out of our consciousness. Freud thought repression was our number one defense mechanism. This makes sense because he thought most of our mind existed in the unconscious. Regression. This is going back to our comfortable childhood days when we face a stressful situation. Reaction formation. Freud thought we had desires that we knew we couldn't allow to surface, so the ego unknowingly changes these forbidden desires into their opposites. Projection. This hides those bad desires by projecting them onto other people. Displacement. This directs the unwanted desire, sex or aggression, towards something more acceptable than the root of the desire. Rationalization. This occurs when we make up a justification for doing something that we know is wrong. Sublimation. This is changing those unwanted desires into something socially valued. Denial. This is where a person rejects that a problem is real or that it's actually serious.
Neo-Freudians in the psychodynamic theories. Freud gained lots of critics and some followers. His followers accepted the id, ego, superego, that personality was defined in childhood and in the unconscious, but differed by increasing the role of the consciousness and decreasing the roles of sex and violence. Alfred Adler and Karen Horney felt that a child's social, not sexual, struggles define their personality formation. Adler spoke of an inferiority complex that occurred when we failed to overcome struggles as kids. Horney spoke of a kid's sense of helplessness that creates in us a desire for love and security. Carl Jung agreed with Freud that the unconscious drove people. In this, he disagreed with other Neo-Freudians. He believed in the collective unconscious. This is our supposedly common collection of images that we have gained together as human beings. Examples of this are myths, religions, and other symbolic images found in different cultures. Freud used projective tests to study the unconscious. The idea of these tests is that the person taking it would project their unconscious into their response. Two well-known projection tests are the TAT, or the thematic apprehension test, in which a person is shown an ambiguous picture that can be interpreted in different ways. The next of these is the Rorschach test, where you are shown a series of symmetrical shapes and the patient is supposed to tell you what they see. Most of these tests are thought to be invalid and are not commonly used anymore. It is also thought that Freud put too much emphasis on repression. Where Freud thought traumatic experiences were repressed into our unconscious, more evidence shows that traumatic experiences are actually seared into our memory and cannot be forgotten. Abraham Maslow said that people are motivated by a hierarchy of needs and to seek self-actualization, that is, to reach one's full potential. Maslow said we fulfill the most basic needs first, then move on to others. The first need is physiological, which is hunger and thirst. The second need is safety, or to feel the world is organized and predictable. The third is belongingness and love, which is the need to love and be loved, to be accepted and avoid loneliness. The fourth need is esteem needs, which is we need self-esteem, achievement, competence, independence, recognition, respect from others. Number 5 is self-actualization, or to live up to our full potential. And number 6 is self-transcendence, or to find meaning beyond ourselves. Carl Rogers agreed with Maslow and believed that people are basically good and unless stopped would move towards self-actualization. Rogers thought 3 parts were needed to self-actualization. First of these is genuineness, which is a person must be honest with him or herself and not put up fronts. Number 2 is acceptance, which is a person must accept others and ourselves for who we are, must give unconditional positive regard, which is an attitude of grace. And lastly, empathy, which is a person should share others' feelings. He or she should feel their pain. The person's self-concept is crucial for humanists. This is our sense of knowing who we are. Humanists would often ask how someone would want to be and how they really are, to evaluate their level of self-concept. Some critics point out that humanistic technique is unscientific and very naive, ignoring that people can do evil. Some psychologists prefer to describe personality based on the traits we show. This is called the trait perspective. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, also known as the MBTI, is used to identify people's personality traits. It is widely used today and asks either-or questions, such as, do you like routine or spontaneity? The factor analysis is used to cluster together people's personality traits. Eisnick created a test that measures how introverted or extroverted you are, and how emotionally stable or unstable you are. Personality inventories are a long questionnaire on a variety of topics such as feelings and behavior. The most famous of these is the MMPI, or the Multiphasic Minnesota Personality Inventory. The MMPI tries to pinpoint abnormalities in personality. Modern personality tests focus on the big 5 factors of personality. The first of these is conscientiousness, or how much you care about the things you do. The next of these is agreeableness. This is how well you get along with others. Next is neuroticism, which is emotional stability or instability. Next is openness, which is whether you prefer newness and variety or routine and usualness. And lastly, extroversion, which is being either outgoing or reserved. Albert Bandura started the social cognitive perspective of personality, which looks at how our traits interact in the situation that we are in. Bandura thought our behavior, internal cognitive factors, environmental factors all interacted with one another to create personality. Julian Rotter identified two theories on the topic of personal control. The external locus of control is where people believe the power outside of themselves determines their fate. People in this group may develop learned helplessness. Internal locus of control is when people believe they control their own fate. Self-control is our ability to suppress desires and delay pleasures. People who criticize this approach say there's a failure to recognize the people factor, the emotions and innate personality involved. There's too much focus on stimulation, they say, removes the humanity from the situation. The spotlight effect is when we tend to overestimate how much others will certainly notice us. Self-esteem is a feeling of self-worth. The self-serving bias is the tendency for us to view ourselves favorably. Individualism is a person doing their own thing. Collectivism gives priority to one's group.